Welcome back to the deep dive. So if you find yourself neck deep in the Prince's Playbook, maybe getting ready for your certification, well, today we're aiming to give you a bit of a shortcut. We want to get past just the definitions and really help you understand, functionally, how the Prince2 scaffolding actually works. Our mission today, it's pretty focused. We're dissecting those 7 core practices, the things you absolutely have to do and the key management products that, well, make them happen. Think of it like understanding the engine of the whole methodology.
Yeah, exactly. And when Prince2 uses the word practice, it's not suggesting something optional. It's really an aspect of managing the project that you've got to apply consistently right through the whole life cycle. Because if those practices aren't applied correctly, the Prince2 processes, the actual steps you follow, they just won't work effectively. So for you listening, the crucial thing to grasp is that Prince2's real power lies in how these 7 practices are woven together. They're used across all the management processes. They really are the foundation.
Right? The bedrock. And the things that make those foundations formal, those are the management products. So the registers, the documents, the data, basically the information tools that put the practices into action. We're going to zero in on the 2 really big ones today. The project initiation documentation, the PID, which is sort of the project's constitution, and the very dynamic project log. Okay, so let's unpack these 7 practices. We thought a good way, maybe a memory aid for you, is to use the main question each one answers. Let's start right at the top. Always the most vital question, isn't it?
That would be the business case practice. And it answers that fundamental question, why? Why are we doing this project? You see, every project starts as just an idea, right? Some potential value. This practice is all about how that initial idea gets properly developed into a viable investment proposal. And really critically, how you keep checking that you're focused on the benefits and the purpose throughout the project's life. Is it still aligned with the business?
Okay, makes sense. Why are we here? Next up is organizing. That answers who? Right, projects. Well, they're temporary by nature, aren't they? And cross-functional. You're pulling people from different teams, different departments. So the usual line management structure, it just doesn't fit. The organizing practice gives you that blueprint for the temporary project team structure, defining all the roles and responsibilities clearly.
And it's absolutely vital because it makes sure those 3 core interests you've got, the business, like the sponsors paying for it, the user, the people who will actually use the end product, and the supplier, the ones providing the skills and resources, are all properly represented, especially on the project board, the decision-making body.
Got it. So why and who are covered? Then we hit a really big one, plans.
Yeah.
This tackles how much, and when. Yeah, this practice defines how you actually design and develop the plans and how they link up with the quality practice, which we'll get to. Plans are really the main communication tool. What I find interesting is the structure Prince2 insists on here. You need different levels of plans matched to the different layers of management. So you've got the directing layer, the managing layer, and the delivering layer. And of course, the actual work gets done in stages based on an approved plan for that stage.
Exactly. Then practice number 4 is quality. This one answers what? What are we actually building or creating? This is where that initial, maybe vague idea of the project's product gets really specific. The quality practice explains how you develop that outline so everyone involved, all the stakeholders, understands the precise quality characteristics needed for the products. And just as importantly, how the project team is going to ensure those requirements are actually met and verified, checked.
Okay, what's? Then we need to brace ourselves for, well, the unexpected. That brings us to the risk practice, answering the inevitable question, what if? Projects are inherently uncertain, aren't they? They're unique. You might be using new procedures, maybe new suppliers, definitely creating something new. So uncertainty is just baked in.
And this practice gives you the framework, the playbook, if you like, for managing that uncertainty, starting with identifying where the risks are, assessing their potential impact, and then designing formal ways to respond to them.
Okay, what if? Then number 6 is the issues practice. The question here is, what now? Something's happened.
Precisely. This is the formal process for looking at and responding to anything that crops up unexpectedly and impacts the project in some way. Snags, problems, things that are just off course. An issue could be a simple unforeseen problem, or it could be a formal change request coming in from a stakeholder. Or perhaps the worst case, it could be finding out a product hasn't met its agreed quality specification. What do you do now?
Right. And finally, we get to progress. This answers a few related questions. Where are we now? Where are we actually going? And the really big one, should we even carry on? Yeah, this practice is all about determining if the current plan is still achievable. It means constantly monitoring performance against the plan and using specific controls to check.
PRINCE2 talks about time-based controls, like maybe weekly highlight reports, and event-based controls, like the crucial end-stage review. These are the checkpoints used to decide if the project is still viable and if it's okay to proceed to the next stage or indeed continue at all.
Okay, so those are the 7. Business case, why? Organizing who? Plans, how much, when, quality, what, risk, what if, issues, what now, and progress. Where are we? Should we continue?
And if you're really getting into the PRINCE2 materials, the core principle here is absolutely clear. All 7 of these practices must be applied in every single project. You can't just say, oh, this is a low-risk project, we'll skip the risk practice. That's not how it works.
But hang on, that sounds incredibly rigid, almost bureaucratic. If I'm just building, say, a small internal company website, do I really need the exact same level of documentation and control as someone, constructing a billion-dollar bridge? Doesn't all that rigor just slow things down unnecessarily?
But that's the beauty of it. That's the exact tension PRINCE2 is designed to handle. And the answer is no, you don't need the same level of formality because of tailoring. The method states clearly that it must be tailored to be fit for purpose, for the specific context of your project. So the practices themselves are mandatory, yes, but how you apply them, the level of detail, the formality, that's flexible.
Okay, that's a really crucial distinction. Mandatory practices, flexible application. So what tells us how much we can tailor down? Or maybe when we need to ramp up the formality, what are the factors?
Well, context is absolutely key. You need to consider things like the project's importance, its size, its overall risk level, and critically, how urgent it is. For instance, a short, small internal project, maybe just focused on meeting a new regulation, might need very light controls, whereas, say, a complex project involving a sensitive customer-supplier relationship dealing with critical data, that's going to demand much more formality, more checks, more detailed documentation.
Right, that makes sense.
And also, you need to consider if your project is just one part of a larger program or portfolio. If it is, you'll need to tailor your controls, your reporting, to fit in perfectly with how that wider program is being managed. All these factors influence how often you monitor, how much detail you record.
And the actual mechanism PRINCE2 gives us to define how we're tailoring each practice is through the management approaches. This is where sort of the rubber meets the road between the general practice and the specific project documentation, right?
Exactly. A management approach, like the risk management approach or the quality management approach or benefits management approach, is basically a document that sets out the specific procedures, the techniques, the standards your project is going to use for that particular aspect of management. And it also clearly defines who is responsible for what within that practice.
And the source material, the Prince's Playbook, emphasizes that the level of detail here is entirely up to you based on that tailoring decision. Your risk management approach could literally be, I don't know, 3 bullet points for that simple internal website.
Or it could be a 50-page instruction manual for the complex, high-risk bridge project. The structure is there, but the scale is adaptable.
Okay, speaking of documents, let's make that transition now. We've talked about how the practice is. Now let's look at the key tools, the management products. We need to dig into those 2 cornerstone products you mentioned earlier that really hold the system together.
Right. The first one, and arguably the most foundational, is the project initiation documentation, usually just called the PID. This is compiled during the initiation stage of the project. Its whole purpose, initially, is to gather all the information needed to get the project board's authorization to actually proceed with the project. Once it is authorized, it becomes the absolute baseline for managing and controlling the project going forward.
We touched on this before, but it's worth emphasizing again. The PID really acts like the contract between the project manager and the project board. It lays out the agreed direction, the scope, the constraints, the justification. The board essentially says, okay, we agree to this plan, these terms, go ahead and deliver it. And this contract has 3 main uses that if you're studying, you really need to remember. First, it makes sure the project board has a solid, well-thought-out basis for making that big commitment of resources. Second, it acts as the benchmark, the baseline, against which you measure progress, assess any issues that come up, and continually check if the project is still viable, still worthwhile.
And third, it's the single source of reference, the single source of truth for the whole temporary project organization. If someone new joins the team halfway through, maybe a new supplier comes on board, or a team member changes, they can pick up the PID and get up to speed quickly on what the project's about and exactly how it's being governed.
Okay, so it's the foundational document. What absolutely has to be in it?
Well, because it needs to reflect how all 7 practices are being applied and tailored, it's pretty comprehensive. At a minimum, you've got to have the project definition that covers the scope, objectives, constraints, acceptance criteria. You need the chosen project approach. Critically, the updated business case, the why. You also need the project management team structure, showing who's who, linking back to that organizing practice, and very importantly, all those specific management approaches we just talked about, how you'll manage risk, quality, change, benefits, communication, and so on. Plus, of course, the overall project plan.
Wow, okay, so definition, justification, structure, plans, the rules for managing everything. It really is the project's Bible. But here's where it gets a bit complex and maybe quite interesting for the project manager day to day. The source material calls the PID a living product. It's meant to reflect the current status, isn't it? Its components get updated, maybe rebaselined at the end of each stage.
That's right, and it's a really clever feature, actually. It seems like a paradox, but it works. While the current version of the PID should always reflect the project as it is today, perhaps, with updated forecasts or minor scope adjustments, approved via change control, the original version, the one that the project board initially authorized right back at the start of the project, that version is carefully preserved, it's archived. That original baseline is non-negotiable because that is the ultimate yardstick you'll use to judge the project's performance and success when it finally closes.
Ah, okay. So the project manager constantly needs to compare the current reality with that original contract, asking, are we still on track to deliver what we promised back then? And if things drift too far from that preserved baseline, well, that might trigger a need to go back to the board for formal reauthorization, perhaps through an exception plan.
Exactly. It forces those continuous checks on viability and alignment with the original agreement.
Okay, that's the PID, the foundational contract. Now let's pivot to the other key product, the project log. If the PID is the constitution, maybe the project log is more like the project manager's daily journal, or as you said, a pilot's flight log. It keeps a live, constantly changing record of what's happening.
That's a good analogy. The log's main purpose is to capture all that dynamic information, current issues, lessons as they're learned, the status of products being delivered, quality checks being performed, changes in risks, actions being taken. Because projects are always changing, this product is, by nature, pretty volatile and accessed frequently.
And you mentioned it's usually not just one single document. For practical reasons, it's often broken down.
That's right. To keep things manageable, it's typically a collection of separate, more specific logs or registers. So you'd expect to see an issue register that links directly to the issues practice we discussed, a lessons log, a product register to track the deliverables, a quality register for the test results, and, of course, a risk register, mapping to the risk practice. Plus, there's often a daily log, which acts as a kind of catch-all for more informal actions, events, notes, or conversations that the project manager wants to record.
Okay, so a collection of logs, and presumably they all follow a similar structure for consistency.
Yes, generally. If you look across these different registers, issues, risks, quality, the kind of data needed for each entry is usually quite consistent. This is really helpful for reporting and auditing later. Typically, every entry will need things like a unique identifier, the date it was first logged, who logged it, the date it was last updated, its current status, like open, closed, in progress, maybe a classification or priority, and then, of course, the full details of the issue, risk, or action itself.
Now, listening to all this PID updates, managing multiple registers in the project log, it sounds like the project manager could end up spending a huge amount of time just on administration. How does Prince2 stop the management products themselves from becoming bureaucratic overhead, getting in the way of actually managing?
Well, we circle back again to tailoring. If the project is small, simple, low risk, maybe your entire project log is literally just one spreadsheet file with 5 different tabs for the registers. Super simple. But if the project is large, complex, high risk, then you might well be using a sophisticated project management information system, maybe even have dedicated project support staff helping to maintain these logs. The Prince2 method expects you, the project management team, to tailor the tools you use and the frequency you update them to match the level of control that the project actually needs, based on its context and risk profile. The structure of the information is defined, but the mechanism for capturing and managing it is flexible.
Okay, that makes sense. The level of effort should match the need for control. So just to pull this all together for everyone listening, the 7 practices define how we absolutely must manage the project, answering those key questions like why, who, what if, and so on. And the management products, particularly the PID and the project log we focused on, are the essential information tools we use to apply those mandatory practices effectively. They give us both that formal baseline agreement, the PID, and a way to capture all the dynamic changes and activities day to day, the project log.
Absolutely. And one final point may be particularly useful if you are studying the manual. Remember that the structure of every single practice chapter within the official PRINCE2 guidance is incredibly consistent. Each one covers purpose, the practice definition, guidance for effective use, common techniques, links to management products, key roles involved, and how it relates to the principles. That deliberate, repeatable structure is a really important design feature. It's what helps make the method feel robust and reliable, no matter how much or how little you end up tailoring the actual documentation for your specific project.
That consistency is definitely helpful when you're trying to get your head around it all. Okay, so finally, as always, we like to leave you with a thought to mull over, something based on the source material. Here it is. Given that tailoring gives project boards and managers such wide latitude, such freedom, in deciding the level of detail needed in the project's documentation for maybe just a few paragraphs to a whole instruction manual, why do you think maintaining that preserved frozen baseline of the original project initiation documentation is considered so fundamentally non-negotiable? Why is it deemed absolutely essential for successful project closure and for assessing, ultimately, whether the project truly delivered the value it promised back at the start? Something to think about.